Hello and welcome to Communication Connection. I'm your host, Terry Likes. Thank you so much for joining us. As you may know, this program, we like to look at the accomplishments of students, faculty, and alumni affiliated with the Department of Communication. And in this episode, we're joined by a brand new faculty member this year in the department, Dr. Jessica Collier, an assistant professor. Welcome to the program. We're glad to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
We know, or we're going to learn about your background, and you have a doctorate from the University of Texas, Austin. You have a master's degree from University of North Carolina and a bachelor's degree from University of Virginia, a great pedigree. And we can use all those letters, UVA, UNC, and UT Austin, and so forth. But when you were finishing your doctorate and doing a postdoctoral fellowship at UT Austin, you were presented with the opportunity of the possibility of coming to Mississippi State and Starkville. What is it that attracted you to coming here?
Yeah, so I think the thing that I was most excited by is when I came to visit Mississippi State, I was just kind of wowed at how bubbly everything was. There was so much energy. The program was growing. The new graduate program was just starting. And I thought, like, wow, that's someplace that I want to be. All the faculty here are doing such innovative things in the areas of research and teaching. And so I think that was probably the thing that excited me the most.
And with that pedigree, I know you have to be very proud of three highly respected institutions, and now adding Mississippi State to that pedigree as well.
Absolutely, yeah. It was a real blessing to have the opportunity to go to each of those institutions, learn from the faculty there, and now be a faculty, hopefully, sharing that knowledge with my own students. I will say, coming off the first weekend of the NCAA tournament, I may be a little less proud to be from some of those institutions, but all joking aside, it's been great, yeah. Well,
it's certainly interesting probably to say I've been in all of these different parts of the country.
Yeah, absolutely.
From North Carolina to Virginia to Texas and now Mississippi.
Certainly. At least I'm staying in the warmer climates too, which has been nice.
Well, I tend to agree with that as well. Well, you have several areas of specialty in your research, and of course what will blend over in what you're able to teach students in the classroom. One of those was a recent publication. We've all heard the term fake news, and it was very prevalent in the previous presidential administration.
Yeah.
But you've done research in this area. What is unique about fake news? What would you like the audience to know about your research?
Sure. I think the first thing, or the most important thing that I would like them to know is maybe don't say fake news. Opt for other terms like misinformation. And the publication that you're talking about actually looked into this exact problem with newsrooms and their reporting, what language they use to talk about false content. And we designed an experiment to kind of test when newsrooms say fake news or false news or misinformation, what kind of damaging consequences can that have for people's levels of media trust, their trust in specific news outlets, and how they perceive the journalist, the credibility of the journalist at those outlets. And what we find is fake news, more than the other two terms, so more than false news or misinformation, has really negative consequences for how credible they see journalists and for their levels of media trust. And so if we want to build up media trust, which has been kind of historically low recently, one of the things that we might be able to do is just kind of avoid that terminology altogether.
This is going to be a sidebar question, but you mentioned media trust and how it has eroded over time. If you were to look back 50 years ago, and surveys would show that CBS anchor Walter Cronkite was the most trusted man in America versus where we are today, what has happened? I guess this has been part of a snowball effect, and fake news, if you will, or whatever term we wish to use, has only dampened the public's spirits or trust.
Yeah, and I think when you point back to Walter Cronkite, like, that's an area where we didn't have quite, or a time when we didn't have quite so fragmented of a media environment. So people are choosing a wide variety of outlets at this point for where they get their news from. And when we talk about the media kind of broadly, then people have a lot of different ideas about what that necessarily means and where they do trust information and where they don't. So I think, I don't know, time has just kind of created a different media ecosystem for us, and maybe that's why we're seeing some of the issues with trust and, the prevalence of especially false content through platforms on like social media, the ease with which we're able to spread that now has kind of exacerbated that problem.
And you have a background in political communication as well, and other parts of your research related to this, news trust, scandal
Yeah.
certainly plays a role, and we could talk all day about that, and political efficacy.
sure.
Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so this is part of a recent publication as well, where we're looking at, okay, these kind of environmental or contextual factors that are occurring in the world, how people trust media, and this was during 2018, so we're during the Trump administration as well. The political scandals that sort of kind of repeatedly came up in the news during that time. How does your knowledge of political scandal and your trust in news affect your political efficacy, which we can separate into how responsive you think your government is to your needs and how capable you feel you are of participating in politics yourself. And what we find is that when people trust the news less, they see the government as less responsive to their needs. And when people have more knowledge of ongoing political scandals, they see themselves as more capable of participating in politics. So I don't really know what we do with that information now that we have it. But it's just to say that maybe being aware of scandals that are going on is just another form of political information. And if you're able to gather that political knowledge, then maybe you think you're more capable or more well-equipped to participate in politics.
Yes, because there is certainly a lot to digest there,
Absolutely.
and we're getting it from a lot of different angles nowadays, as you alluded to.
Yeah.
So. You also have published in the Center for Media Engagement an article about news deserts, and people still get their news even if we're in a news desert. Tell us about that, how we're getting the news, and those who are in news deserts.
Sure. So I'll define the term first. So news deserts are just local areas with either no local newspapers or heavily limited access to local news. And I was really interested in, coming from the misinformation background, whether these are spaces where we don't have kind of trusted traditional journalism, so does gossip and rumor mill kind of dominate these communities? And my undergraduate research assistant and I called librarians in news deserts across the country, and we asked them, where do you go for local news? And do you believe or do you agree with this news desert terminology to describe your community? And we heard so many interesting stories. There's a county in Utah where there's no home delivery of mail. And so everyone there has to go to the post office to pick up their mail. So post office bulletin boards are really valuable real estate for getting information about your community there. Same thing, we talked to Burroughs in Alaska, where the nearest town is 100 miles away. And so the 200 residents that live in this local community rely on prayer chains and word of mouth and a community Facebook group for getting their information. And so what we find is that for about 40% of these communities, they rely on Facebook for information about their local community on a daily basis. So that's where a lot of them are going. But then we also surveyed 1,000 people in news deserts across the country and asked them, do you agree that your community is a news desert? We gave them kind of the definition that academics use. And 46% of them said, no, we don't think we live in a news desert. And they reported feeling like they had access to information about their community. They felt more informed. When we asked them these really specific questions like, what's the local unemployment rate? Or how many weeks in the last year was your community experiencing drought? They knew the answers to those questions. And so I think it kind of raised a bigger question for us, which is there seems to be some level of resilience for some of the news deserts across the U.S. And so what's going on in those communities that we can look to as effective ways of sharing information about their community when they don't, in the face of declining newsrooms or closures of local newsrooms, and how might we be able to kind of spread that solution to the other 50% or so of people who do say they live in a news desert and agree with that.
Well, this is really important work, and you certainly have a very active research agenda. You're able to take all of this to the classroom and share this knowledge and more with your students, and I know you're having fun. You're teaching courses like communication and leadership, one that students very much enjoy, elements of persuasion, and in the fall you'll teach political communication. I know it's rewarding to be able to get into the classroom and share all of that.
Oh, absolutely. It's been a real treat to teach this year so far, and my students are always game for whatever I throw at them, so that's been exciting to test some new ideas out. And I will put in a shameless plug for all of my students to enroll in political communication in the fall, because primary 2024 season is already underway, and I think it's going to be a fun class.
You are also very active already in service as far as MSU engagement in the community and in the profession. Is there, aside from seeing you tailgating at football games, is there a service engagement activity for which you've enjoyed so far?
Yeah, I think if you had asked me this question a week or two ago, I would have had a different answer. But yesterday I started advising students. And I can already say that's going to be my favorite service activity here, being able to just kind of hear what their goals and dreams are and what classes that they're interested in has been so rewarding already, and I know I'm just going to love that moving forward.
Well, in a recent faculty meeting, you shared some exciting news, and so I'm going to put you on the spot if you're willing to share it with our audience. You had some very exciting news. Tell us about that.
Absolutely. So as of New Year's Eve 2022, I am recently engaged. My fiance, Jesse, he popped the question at the Biltmore Estate in Asheville, North Carolina. So we got engaged and celebrated there. It was a lovely weekend.
Well, that's absolutely wonderful. We're so excited for you too, and to have you both in Starkville and as part of our faculty and the university community. One of the great things you mentioned, advising and learning more about students, but is able to offer some wisdom for students. What advice do you like to share with students?
I love to tell students to be creative. And that can mean creative in the sense of, developing and honing a creative skill or a craft. But in my persuasion classes, it means coming up with a unique way to share a persuasive message. Or in ethics, it means thinking through all of the possible alternative solutions that you might have to an ethical dilemma. And so when they go to, if they choose industry, I think the jargon that people usually use is think outside the box. And that's what I mean by being creative. Put your personal stamp on something in the way that you choose to make change or solve a problem. And if they choose research and academia, coming up with those creative research designs for answering questions. So I love to tell students that so that their personality shines through in the way that they approach what they do. I think it could be really valuable. Well,
I'm sure it's open-ended and leaves the doors wide open for them. I'm sure they appreciate that. In our final 30 seconds or so, challenges lying ahead for you besides becoming tenured and a long-standing member of the university?
Time. Time is already the biggest challenge I face, not just in this 30 seconds, but in trying not to say yes to everything, but also still having time for everything else. So that's, I think, the biggest challenge.
Well, we're delighted to have you here on campus. Congratulations on your wonderful news. Thank you so much for all you're doing for our students, and we thank you for watching us here on Communication Connection. It's been our real pleasure to have Dr. Jessica Collier, a new assistant professor in the Department of Communication. Thank you for watching. I'm Terry Likes. We'll look forward to seeing you here next time on Communication Connection.